Hey, what's up, y'all? This is William, the Permaculture Consultant, and one of the more common questions I get this time of year is, can I compost through the winter? And the answer is the classic permaculture answer, and that is, it depends. It depends on what kind of winter you have. So today we're gonna go through a couple of different composting options depending on what kind of winters you guys have. Not everybody is going to be able to keep up. You see that big blue tarp back there? Not everybody around the United States or other places are going to be able to keep up a hot compost pile because the temperatures are too low. But you do have some other options out there. And if you do have mild winters like I do, then I'm going to show you some tweaks that you need to make to your compost pile in order to keep that going through the cooler temperatures. Now remember, we do a thing called Permaculture Q&A here where you guys ask questions down below in the comment section. Make sure you leave that hashtag Permaculture Q&A at the beginning of your question so that way I can easily identify it and I answer it live on a video. Also, if you need a permaculture consultation where I come to your place, give you an order of operations, what to do and when to do it, hit up the email down below. Now let's get started with the video. All right, so let's say you're in a colder climate where you have snow on the ground the majority of your winter season. You're not going to be able to successfully keep an 18-day pile or a hot compost pile going through those days unless you have like a shed for it or a building or a barn or something like that for it to keep the snow and keep the outside layer of that compost from freezing, because freezing is the death to life. It's not compatible with life. You're going to be going a little bit different route than having a compost pile, like something like an actual pile. Instead, what you're going to do is compost in place, which is almost it's definitely an easier method of composting. But what I would suggest doing is getting some sort of ground cover established before the snow comes in. Get a ground cover established in your garden beds and stuff, and then let the snow come in. And then the snow is going to pack on top of this ground cover. And it's going to provide a perfect environment for decomposition to take place. In fact, the fastest recorded decomposition actually occurs underneath your snowpack. So right here, I have some red clover. What I would do is I would get this established first and then let the snow come in. And the snow is going to pack on top of this. Now that layer in between the snowpack and this vegetation is going to be a perfect environment for your decomposition to occur. This stuff is going to basically break down. The snowpack is providing enough moisture and an insulated temperature for your microbes to thrive and to go ahead and eat and break this stuff down and return it to your soil. So that way by next spring, you have much better soils to deal with. But let's say you don't have enough time to get your ground cover established before that first snowfall, or you have some severe freezing temperatures right now, like it's super cold right now, and plants aren't going to germinate right now. What you could do before your next snow event is actually get some sort of carbon source, like a fast breaking down carbon source on the top of your beds. You could cover it with a couple inches of straw or hay, for example. I would stay away from hay because you're not reaching high temperatures enough to kill the hay seeds, and you might be growing hay next spring. But what you could do is put down a thick layer of straw. Or you could put down, fall just happened for a lot of people. So what you could do is put down a thick layer of tree leaves as well, which is a super clean carbon source because of the high amount of filtration that occurs before the actual leaf is formed. Leaves are a super clean carbon source. You could fill your beds with a bunch of leaves, wet them down, make sure they kind of stay in place, and then allow that snowfall to come in and cover up those leaves. And then you'll probably notice by the next year that you don't have many leaves left. In fact, it's kind of turned into this very dark brown cocoa looking color. And that's going to be very good soil. That is most likely going to be your best way of composting if it's already freezing temperatures out and if you have snow on the way. Because again, the fastest recorded decomposition occurs underneath your snowpack. Believe it or not, it's not in a rainforest. It's not in an old growth forest. It's not in a forest of any kind, and it's not in your gardens or anything like that. The fastest rate of decomposition occurs underneath your snowpack. So a lot of people think like, oh, I have snow on the ground, I can't compost or anything like that. All you have to do is get the ingredients in place ahead of time. Make sure they're cleaner ingredients because you're not having the high temperatures killing off any pathogens or weed seeds or anything like that. So make sure you use clean sources of carbon. Get that carbon layered out, get it like a thick layer of it, make sure there's plenty of food for the microbes over the winter, and then just let the snow fall. And then that's all you have to do. Just like that. Easy as that. Alrighty, so next let's look at a different method. And this is going to apply to people who either have like on and off snow through the winter or just milder winters like we do here in Texas. And this is the hot compost route. Now, typically, depending on which recipe you're following, there's going to be certain layers or certain levels of each ingredient that you add to your compost pile. Here is the compost pile that I have going right now. Now, in this compost pile, there's a bunch of different ingredients. There's grass clippings, there's wood chips, there's garden waste, there's also chicken feathers in here. And the chicken feathers is the main ingredient. Let me get these shadows out of the way. But yeah, the chicken feathers and chicken organs and stuff are a main component of composting through the winter. Now, it doesn't have to be chicken organs or chicken feathers or anything like that. What it could be is anything that's going to be high in nitrogen. I need a high nitrogen food source. Where's my pitchfork? I need a high nitrogen food source to keep my microbes active and warm through the winter. Now, the outside edges of your compost and stuff might, they might die off. The organisms might just retreat back into the center of the compost pile and stuff like that, which is fine because you're going to be flipping this. So remember, if you're composting through the winter, then you need to adjust your nitrogen levels. Now, if you're following like an 18-day compost recipe, then a third of your ingredients is basically a third manure, a third carbon, and a third green material, which is usually like mid-range or higher in nitrogen. Definitely higher in nitrogen than your carbon. But if you're doing it through the winter, then you need to adjust your layers. You need to adjust your levels and increase your high nitrogen food source. Now, chicken feathers and chicken organs are an awesome high nitrogen food source to use because the ratio is like through the roof. Also, if you're going through and you're flipping your compost pile and you notice that you have lost heat really, really early, one thing you can do, and I don't recommend doing this if you're on any kind of prescriptions or anything like that, but what you can do is actually pee on your compost pile. The ratio for urine is like 1:1. So let's talk about ratios real quick so you can kind of understand what's high nitrogen and what's just mid-range. Your grass clippings are about 25:1 carbon to nitrogen, 25 or 30:1 depending on when you harvest your grass. Now, it's December right now, so all of my grasses, all of my vegetation and stuff like that is going to be slightly higher in carbon because as the plant grows up, as it gets bigger and as it gets older, it's switching from high nitrogen to mid-range nitrogen to higher in carbon because that's just how plants do things. So keep that in mind as well. So a lot of the green material that you would use in early spring that's going to be higher in nitrogen is going to be a lot lower in nitrogen by this time of the year. Think of it this way, like the woodier or the stockier the plant is that you're using for your compost, the higher in carbon that's going to be. The flimsier or the softer a plant is that you're using for compost, the higher in nitrogen it's going to be. So just kind of keep that in mind. But you need enough high nitrogen food source to keep your compost heated through. Like this compost is pretty warm right now. You need enough to keep it warm through the winter. Because if this reaches too low of temperatures, your compost could freeze, and that's the death to all the organisms in here. Or it could have too low of temperatures. Like the temperature is an indicator of how active your microbes are. And if your microbes, or if your temperature goes really, really low, then your microbes aren't that active. And that's the opposite effect that we want in our compost. We want active microorganisms in our compost. Now you can overdo it on your high nitrogen. So keep that in mind. And let's say you already made the compost pile and you're like, man, it's kind of dropping off on temperature a little too soon. What you would do is open up the compost pile and then apply your high nitrogen food source to the center. food scraps are also a high nitrogen food source for your compost pile. So keep that in mind as well. And I should give you a warning that if you have not made a hot compost pile before, or if you've not made one successfully, then winter is not going to be the best time to start. I would just kind of chop and drop in your garden and then wait until next spring to do your first hot compost pile. There's a couple reasons for that. Like if you wait till spring, then you can just follow a recipe, which I recommend doing, is just follow a recipe exactly. Also, it's easier to source your materials in the spring than it is in the winter. Like finding a green high nitrogen source or mid-range nitrogen source of grass right now is going to be kind of hard for me. Now I do have access to it in the garden in the form of that clover, but I'm letting that clover stay there because it's feeding my microbes in the form of exudates right now. So they're doing their job in the garden right now. I don't want to interrupt that and ruin what they're doing. So like I was saying, finding a high nitrogen source of vegetation right now is a little bit more difficult. Now you can always go buy a high nitrogen source if you wanted to. Like you could get some dried alfalfa and then rehydrate it, declump it, make sure you break up all the clumps, and then reapply it to your compost. Now some people are processing right now. Like when you get into the colder temperatures, a lot of these homestead processors and stuff are going to have a lot of the organs, a lot of the stuff that people don't eat. And that is a great source to add to your compost. Some of the best compost in the world that I've ever made comes from animal byproducts or products, unused products from doing the animal processing. So just keep that in mind. And if you've never done it before, like I said earlier, maybe this isn't the time to start. Maybe instead spend this winter in doing some compost education, understanding what good compost is, what a good composting method is, and understanding what it's not, and then also come up with a recipe that works for you. If you're interested in composting and you've never done it before, I might suggest following the 2-ingredient compost pile that I did earlier this year. It's one of my more popular videos, is a 2-ingredient. If you have done it before and you want to make it a little bit better, then I would suggest doing the 3-ingredient compost pile where you introduce animal bedding and manure. It's kind of a crucial part in your compost to add more than 2 ingredients. Like you can get by with 2 ingredients, but it's not going to be the best compost you can make if you added just one more ingredient in the form of manure or animal products and stuff like that. So those are good places to start off. I don't really recommend doing cold composting unless you have very, very clean ingredients. The benefits of doing this hot composting method is that you can take dirty ingredients and make them better. For example, like this thermophilic processing of compost, any weed seeds that I have in here will be killed off. Any anaerobic pathogens I have in here or anaerobic microbes, those will be killed off because they don't do well in high temperatures. But if you do a cold composting method, then there's a chance that you actually just breed the bad guys and kind of kick out the good guys. Also, water management is very, very important. And another reason I would, if you've never done it before, I would not wait till winter. I would wait till spring to do it. You want the proper moisture levels in your compost pile. So if I were to take a handful of this compost and squeeze it together, I should get 1 drop that forms and falls from my hand, and not like a steady stream, and it shouldn't be completely dry either. And those are the ideal moisture levels for your compost to breed organisms. Now, some of you also might be wondering, like, what's even the big deal about compost? Why do I need to put this much effort into compost? I can just buy fertilizer from the store. Okay, so for those people, compost, the organisms in compost, the benefit of compost is that I'm breeding microorganisms basically. And these microorganisms are the reason anything grows. The plant shoots down exudates. Like I've told you before, the plant shoots down exudates. which is exactly what my clover is doing in the garden right now. And it feeds the microbes. Now, the microbes, with that exudate or that sugar, there is a grocery list that organism has to get in exchange for that sugar. The organism, usually in the form of like a low-grade bacteria or something like that, or even fungi, goes and gets what's on that grocery list. But the microbe can't make a direct transaction with what it went and got from the inorganic soil, inorganic materials like the sand, silts, and clays. It can't make a direct transaction with the plant until that microbe gets eaten by its predator. So it gets eaten by its predator, and then everything else gets pooped out, and then the plant benefits. And that's why you need these microbes, and like that's where the plants derive their nutrients from, is from this exchange of exudates and them doing grocery runs for the plant, and then the plant benefits. That is the soil food web coined by Dr. Elaine Ingham. Now, I've done more in-depth discussions on what exactly that is and everything if you want more information. But just as a quick overview, the organisms are the reason anything starts growing. They provide all of the nutrients that your plants need, and all of the nutrients that your plants need already exist in the soil in the form of sands, silts, and clays, which should put a good emphasis on why the microbes are so important in your soil, and why if we just focus on farming the microbes and growing the microbes, everything else kind of falls in line. Like if we just focus on the microbes, then we no longer have pests, we no longer have disease, we no longer have blights, we no longer have funguses or anything like bad funguses or anything like that. Like everything else just gets easier if you focus on the microbes. So hopefully this video was helpful for you guys. If you need a consultation, hit up the email down below. If you want more information on composting, then hit up any of the composting videos that I've made previously. I think there's some of the more popular videos that I've ever done. And yeah, also if you want to give to the Hurricane Helene Relief Fund, that's linked down below as well. There are still people that need help. By no means is the job done out there, and it's going to be multiple years before everything is back to where they, started and everything. So thank you guys so much for the people who have donated, and thank you so much to the people who are donating now. So until next time, we'll see you.